Good morning again. My phone says it's 9:45, and I don't want to get in trouble with Hannah, so let's try and keep our timing straight. Got a great session here for you this morning, and thank you for joining after breakfast. A member of the Monmouth College staff since 1992, Jeff Rankin is the college historian and also serves as editor of the college magazine. A lifelong resident of Monmouth and the son of former director of admissions Glenn Rankin, he's an authority on local and college history, often speaking and writing about Monmouth lore and traditions. Prior to joining the Monmouth College staff, Jeff held a similar position for 9 years at Carl Sandburg College in Galesburg. Jeff's talk this morning is about the dramatic changes in the campus landscape since many of you were students. In recent decades, both the college and the city of Monmouth have faced unprecedented challenges, and both have seen their ups and downs. As Jeff will tell you, there's much on the horizon to be hopeful for. At this time, please join me in welcoming Jeff Rankin.
Good morning. Please have a seat. I'm going to start out today with a rather shocking revelation, and that is that the Monmouth College of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s is not the Monmouth College campus of today.
Come on!
You noticed that. But growing up in Monmouth, a block from the college, I remember the footprint of the campus that you remember. It's sort of seared in my memory. And then as the changes have happened, when you're here every day, it's so gradual that you don't really see the dramatic change. And so I'm going to walk you through kind of, if you had been here during those years, how you would gradually see the change. And maybe that will help you realize how we went from what we had in the 60s and 70s to this. So it didn't happen overnight, although it did happen rather quickly and dramatically. But what I'm going to start with, we have a new initiative in our education department. It's called the Rural Education Initiative, and we're trying to do what we can to solve the problem of lack of teachers in our rural schools, not just here but nationwide. And one of the aspects of that is really kind of exciting, it's place-based education, and that's basically using what's here, what this, in the local area, to try to teach kids, even from a very young age, and get them excited about, there's really rich history here in Illinois, even if the industry may be leaving, that sort of thing. But it can be used to teach all sorts of subjects, from math to geography, all those types of things. So we'll start out with a little history of the region, and it's an interesting history. It really began in 1814, and that was the year that Congress set aside bounty land to pay the veterans of the War of 1812. Basically, there was very little money in the treasury, but we had this whole Northwest Territory that was available. It was the biggest asset they had at the time. So there was this large tract of land. There were a few military bounty reservations. This large one was between the Illinois and Mississippi rivers. It was 3.5 million acres. It had not been entered. It was very rich prairie. The glaciers 10 million years ago had pushed all the soil, rich soil down here, and it had been covered with prairie grass, which was so thick that until John Deere invented the plow, it was very difficult to farm. But when that happened, all of a sudden this was the prime place in the country for expansion. And so that's what Monmouth was at the time. It was just this big open area, and it wasn't until the 1820s, about 1827, that the area was surveyed, which allowed veterans to come and claim a quarter section of land, and it was their payment. Now, a lot of those veterans by that time were pretty up there in age, and most of them lived along the East Coast, so it wasn't very practical for many of them to come and settle in the Midwest. So we had speculators and agents who would go along the East Coast and try to sell. They would try to buy the rights to the land from these veterans, give them cash, and then they would be able to sell that to people who wanted to settle here. And one of our early Monmouth settlers was Judge Ivory Quinby. He built the house where the president lives today, and he was involved in this land speculation. He actually had an agent going across the East Coast surveying, looking for veterans who wanted to sell. And he was the lawyer, he was the legal mind back here in Monmouth, and he would handle the deeds and get them taken care of. So it was about 2 years later, 1829, when the first settlers started to kind of slowly come into Illinois, western Illinois. A lot of them came up through Indiana, Kentucky, and then eventually with the Panama Canal, they were able to come up through the Great Lakes and down the Mississippi on riverboats. So about 1831, there was a critical mass of settlers in Warren County. Warren County at that time extended all the way to the river, and they decided they had enough people that they could petition for a government. And so Daniel McNeil was the first settler in Monmouth, built his first cabin, and he became really the founder of Monmouth. He went to Peoria. He had to actually, cross rivers that had no bridges, and he was able to, get permission to have the first elections, and they needed a county seat. And so at the time, Oquawka was sort of the logical place. It had all the riverboat traffic. Farmers in this area would take their their grain and their hogs to Oquawka. But soon the settlers in the Monmouth area got very frustrated. They didn't like to have to go to the river to take care of their business. So they petitioned to have a county seat established at Monmouth. And the way they determined it was they figured where all the little groves and settlements were, and they tried to find a center point that would be equidistant for all those settlers. So that's how Monmouth was formed. There was nothing here, but it was the geographical center that would facilitate all that change. And so that went along fine, but in 1841, the people in what's now Henderson County, were getting upset that they had to drive their horses or whatever to Monmouth, and so they split off and formed a separate county. So we now are to where we are with Warren County. And the first settlers, actually a lot of them were in Henderson County, and they were Presbyterians who'd come up here from Indiana, and they formed the South Henderson Church. And it was South Henderson Church, along with Cedar Creek Church, which had split off and was in Little York, that were responsible for bringing Monmouth College to the center. You can see things have come a long way. You remember the old wooden sign, got nice brass letters now, new logo. Just kind of emblematic of the change. Now, so this is Monmouth. This map is actually from 1869, but it's not a whole lot different from the way the town would have been when Monmouth College was founded. Actually, there was an academy founded in 1853, but it had no physical structure. They just met in churches. And so 1856 was when there was this movement to form an academy, to elevate it to a actual college. And this, we're actually looking southwest. I guess I should be pointing here. This is the public square at the time, and it still maintains sort of the same basic look that it did then. And this man, Abner C. Harding, was a real key person in the founding of both the town and the college. He was an original charter trustee for the college. He endowed the first professorship in math, or in English, actually. We still have a professorship, I believe, or we have an endowment in his name. And he brought the railroad, along with Ivory Quimby, he brought the railroad to Monmouth. It was the Peoria and Oquaca Railroad. Eventually, that was bought up and became part of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy line. But when that came through in 1855, that was the impetus for a huge growth in Monmouth. Finally, the farmers could get their products out to the East Coast. They would also be able to bring in materials for building and starting businesses, stores being able to offer commercial goods. And so it was in that period of rapid growth that Monmouth College also was taking shape. And Abner Harding, not only did he give the first endowed professorship, he gave the land for the first college. And the lot he owned was here. It was on what's now North A Street, just a block from Euclid Avenue. And so he was able to establish that. In 1856, they built the first college building. And this is what it looked like. It was kind of modeled after some of the East Coast, almost some of the churches out there. 2 stories, very simple, had a cupola. The whole top floor was the very important chapel that sat 300 students, and in the bottom were 8 classrooms that would accommodate teaching. Now, this school really only lasted about 3 or 4 years because it grew so fast that they outgrew the space. And so it says academy, and that's because after it became Monmouth College, it was an academy. It was like a high school to prepare students to attend Monmouth. So this gives you sort of the lay of the land. And at that time, this is 6th Street, going right here. This is, again, looking northwest. And nothing was east of 6th Street. It was just farmland. So to accommodate the crowded quarters at the old school, 2 brothers came forward. They were part of the South Henderson Church. They were David and A.Y. Graham, the brothers, and they gave part of their land to form the current college campus. Basically, it became the college addition to Monmouth, and 10 acres was set aside for the college campus, and then 25 acres was reserved. It was given to the college to be sold as building lots for homes, and that was the money that was used to build the first college building. And again, there is the footprint of the first college. Well, that's the college addition, basically. Now we jump forward to 1965. This is kind of many of your era. And this was a very critical time in the development of Monmouth College. As you may know, President Robert Gibson was our last Presbyterian minister. He finally retired about 1963. At that time, the Senate was controlled by the church. Every president was a minister, and at that time, things began to change, and that's when Duncan Wimpress was elected president of Monmouth College. He was 42 years old, pretty young for that time, but he was full of energy and ideas. And he came into a campus that was sort of on the precipice of the old school Presbyterian and what was becoming modern liberal arts education. And at that time, the biggest need was for a science building. And this is the old science building, McMichael. And he had actually, Gibson had worked with the Senate to build an addition to the east of McMichael. It was going to be called Haldeman Hall. Well, Duncan Wimpress came in and he saw the plans, which were already in process. He says, no, that's not modern. That's not the Monmouth College of the future. So he trashed those plans. And they created what was really our first capital campaign of note, which was called Impact. I can't remember what the IMPACT stood for now, but it was a real visionary plan. It was to build a new science building and a new library. And it took some time. It wasn't easy. In 1968, I believe, Aileen Loya, who was the president's secretary, got a phone call out of the blue from an attorney, said, I have a client that wants to give the college a memorial gift for their son who died. Would the college be interested in $1 million? And I'm sure Aileen probably fell off her chair, but that was what was needed. That got the library finished. So about 1970, the science building was still going up. And it was difficult. They were trying to get some major gifts, they just weren't getting them, but they finally got it built. And again, 1965, we saw this big influx of students. A lot of them, well, we had the GI Bill that got things going. Pretty soon we'd have the war, we'd have people trying to stay safe from the draft. They saw a big need for student housing. We had virtually no male dorms. We had Graham Hall that had opened in 1960, but there was a need really to get male students housed on campus. So the federal government was offering a lot of incentives at that time, and Duncan Wimpress decided they would take out some loans and build some new dormitories up here, which became Liebman Hall and Cleland Hall, and then the fraternity complex, which was another controversy. But that was all fine and good, but when things hit the fan in the 1970s, the college had a lot of debt for these buildings and they weren't getting the enrollment. There were a number of factors. I mean, the draft ended, we had the energy crisis, we were getting a lot of students from the East Coast in those days, and then but that was before the advent of some of the big state university systems and the community colleges, so that helped cut off some of that influx. So everything, it was kind of the perfect storm of building for a future that didn't exactly transpire the way they wanted to. So we kind of just kind of plodded along during those years. And then things finally in the early 90s began to change. We had actually, our enrollment had really dipped. We had to, unfortunately, eliminate some programs, and one of those was geology. We were down under 700 students, and things didn't look good. So the trustees and the president and President Haywood and our business officer came up with a plan. They called it the Monmouth plan. It was an innovative plan that would allow students to attend Monmouth for basically the exact same cost that if they attended the state's flagship institution. It was supported by alumni gifts, and under the guidance of Dick Valentine, who came in as a seasoned admission veteran, all of a sudden enrollment started to go up. So the very first manifestation of that was Graham Hall. It had been out in mothballs since the early 70s. It had actually been rented out to Warren Achievement Center locally. They had clients that were living there. The food service fed them. For a while, I don't know if you remember Munson Trucking, a nationwide trucking company based in Monmouth. Courtney Munson was a trustee of the college. They used it as a dormitory for truck drivers to stay overnight. But anyway, 95, they didn't put a lot of money into it, but they opened it up. They used a lot of local labor to get it repainted, that sort of thing. And that was just sort of the first baby steps toward a vibrant new campus. The next project, this had been planned for maybe 8 or 10 years, and that was the old Carnegie Library. It was sitting pretty much not utilized very well. There was an experimental theater on the top floor and costume storage for the theater. The Scots Student Supply, the old bookstore, which had been in the basement of the student union, was on the first floor, as were the dean's offices. And so they really wanted, it was in such a central location that they thought it was critical that it be used to its full advantage. And Harold Poling, 1949 graduate, gave the gift that allowed the renovation. Harold Poling was an interesting guy because he had actually come here during the war as a pre-flight naval cadet and really fell in love with the campus and the town. And so after the war, he came back and enrolled at Monmouth, worked his way up to CEO of the Ford Motor Company. And so we named Poling Hall in his honor. It was sort of converted to a space for student services. We had the business office, we had the dean's office, we had a career center. Physical plant at the time was located in the basement, but it was sort of the beginning of really spending some money on a nice renovation. They actually had to put an elevator in for the first time. They built an addition on the east side that you couldn't tell today wasn't original to the building. And they even put a tunnel, underground tunnel between Poling and Wallace, and that's because there used to be a road, you may remember, going up to the back of Wallace Hall where they could drive and make deliveries. Well, they wanted to eliminate the road. So the tunnel allowed a loading dock here in the back of Carnegie to deliver all the way to Wallace Hall and eliminate that road. 1997, Ivory Quinby's house was not looking good. The trees had become overgrown. It was a case of deferred maintenance, really. It was infested with groundhogs, lived in the nearby cemetery, and they would come and munch on the carpet, on the steps, that sort of thing. But Ivory Quinby's ghost sort of came to the rescue, and that's because of the railroad connection that Ivory had helped bring the CB&Q to Monmouth. There were funds available, unbelievable in Illinois at that time, for historic transportation grants that would celebrate the history of transportation in Illinois. So a large grant was obtained through some really nice grant writing, and that helped fund a big portion of the renovation, which was dramatic. And it really, you know, Quinby House is such a gracious home, and it's built at the highest point in Monmouth, and it really needs to have that, original aura that Ivory Quinby intended it to have. And then our first true residence hall renovation happened in '97. This was under Sue Huseman, President Huseman, who was just here a short time. But McMichael Hall is an amazing building. It was finished in 1914, and at the time it was considered one of the preeminent residence halls in the Midwest. It was state-of-the-art. It had, the entire top floor was a gymnasium where the women could play basketball, do whatever physical activity in private. It had a trunk room where they could store all their trunks. The dining hall, first time we had a dining hall, it was in the lower level where the bookstore is now. And before that, students had to eat at eating clubs in town or get their food somewhere else. And it even had, in 1914, this was big, this was like the equivalent of the microwave oven. They had a chafing dish room, and it was big, and the girls would go in and they would cook meals with chafing dishes. Anyway, McMichael, you know, it was still, and you remember, many of you remember what a neat place it was with individual lavatories in a lot of the rooms. Corner rooms were really big and nice. So it was great to get this landmark. They gutted it, they put in some air conditioning in places, and just redid everything. It was really beautiful. And the following year is when the Giese administration began, and in my mind, Dick Giese was sort of the visionary. He was the first true fundraiser we had who had a real strong record in fundraising. He knew how to do it. I think for years, people at Monmouth just didn't appreciate the power of fundraising that the alumni we had, who had the resources, who had the love for the college, and they just weren't asked. You know, they weren't cultivated and explaining to them what the importance of a gift would be. And he knew this very well. So during the next 10 years or so, he would make a large impact, and one of them was the end of landlocked. And for years, people at the college said, well, we're landlocked, we can't expand, you know. And he said, that's not true. He says, you know, we'll go about it in a slow, methodical process. As property becomes available, we'll try to buy it, and we'll gradually create a footprint of a college that will be contiguous. It won't have houses and other things scattered in between. We'll have a truly beautiful campus, a space to grow. And so that first year, some things happened. We were able to get the city to vacate some streets. Some of these you'll remember. We had East Detroit going through campus. We had College Place that was behind ATO and Fulton Hall. And they even moved some houses, so it wasn't like they just went in and bulldozed everything. But that was the start. And then '99, we began sort of this program of every summer, if you were on campus, if you didn't hear beeping of trucks backing up and end loaders and everything, you felt like you were in another place. It was just a constant every year building project. So Stockdale Center, built in 1963, they did some major renovations in there. The old ATO house had been sitting empty since the ATOs had moved to the fraternity complex. And there was a need for assisting students with writing and careers and that sort of thing. And then the English department needed a home. And so Mellinger Center, we got our first big gift from the Mellinger Foundation in Monmouth, which is a wonderful organization that is devoted to helping. Their primary mission was to help students in Western Illinois afford college, but then they started thinking bigger. David Fleming, class of '46, became its president, and he helped establish a relationship with the foundation, which continues to this day. And then the 9th Street parking lot, this was another big thing at the time. In order to attract students, you had to allow cars, and every student had to have a car, and if you didn't offer that option, some other college would probably snatch them up. So some houses along 9th Street across from McMichael and Greer were taken down, and the first new parking lot went up. Now, Dick Giese, I remember his first day on campus after the interviews and everything. He said, well, I'm going to go out and I'm going to look at our athletic facilities. Now, he'd come from Mount Union College, which is a national powerhouse in football, and he appreciated the importance of athletics to recruiting and also, you know, to getting good students who will work hard and manage their time well. And he came back just downhearted. He said, I did not realize our athletic facilities were this bad. So he convinced some of our trustees that a priority was to get new athletic facilities, and he began really a remarkable program to do that. So the first athletic thing that happened was Peacock Memorial Athletic Park. Saf and Betty Peacock, he was a trustee, not an alum, gave money to really create a beautiful state-of-the-art, not only baseball, but 2 soccer fields. And what's interesting about that property is the college had actually owned it since the 1960s with a plan originally of building a football stadium on it. And that never happened. It was cornfields and it was rolling hills, and it was just remarkable. They were able to transform that into a nice flat, really state-of-the-art field. They brought in people, I think, who had worked with some Chicago sports teams to get the land just right and the grass so it would be beautiful. Also in 2000, Boone House, Some of you from 69 probably took classes there with Commander Boone and his wife, Catherine, down 9th Street, and it was it was given partly by a nephew who owned it, and the college renovated it to turn it into sort of a retreat center. So next year, Bowers Hall, and this was a pretty amazing place. Dave Bowers had been chairman of the board, and he saw that admissions, now we were getting athletic facilities, we really needed some new residential facilities that would be comfortable and really exciting and inviting to prospective students. And so Bowers Hall went up. It was, just amazing. And you're staying, you know how nice it is. But the air conditioning and the suite style living really made a remarkable difference, and sort of got the whole idea of a whole west side of campus with new facilities that would match it. 2001, just some more fairly minor things, but Boucher Plaza, it was just kind of an unused space between the library and the athletic field. And Stockdale Center, at that point, there was this new trend toward getting away from the old cafeteria lines and having food stations. And again, this is an admissions thing largely, but it was completely reconfigured so that it would allow that. 2002 was pretty important in that the library really got the attention it needed. Many of you will remember it being this sort of fortress with no windows, and it was just this austere place. And even worse, in the 1970s, the air conditioning broke, and that was during the energy crisis, and nothing was done for 30-some years. Summers in there were brutally hot. Not ideal for a library. But they opened up, they put 36 new windows in it and made it really a show place for a library. We also, you'll remember the old tennis courts by Student Center, built a $1 million tennis stadium with 6 courts and a parking lot. And then just to the east, we finally got some practice fields that were dedicated for football, which was another growing thing of importance. And then our LeSueur Nature Preserve, Bill and Arlene LeSueur from the class of 43, they were approached, and they were both scientists, and they wanted to do something for the biology department, for nature, and so there was a 16-acre tract of land adjacent to the baseball field that they set aside to try to create different zones, different types of geography for biology, local native plants to thrive. And there's also a 1-mile walking track that the public can use in there. Now, 2003 was huge, hugely dramatic. Walter Huff had really given the college an energy boost in 1983 when he gave a gift of $5 million, which was at the time, I think our endowment was around $3 million at the time, and that was one of the largest gifts to a private college in the country that in 1983. He stepped forward again, and he was, he understood vision. He was interested in athletics and fitness, but he saw that it was critical that we have a state-of-the-art athletic center, and it wasn't an easy process to figure out what to do, because we had the old gymnasium built in 1925. We had the Glennie Gymnasium, which was attached to that, built in the mid-'80s. But we had no swimming pool. They closed down the swimming pool because it was outdated. It wasn't safe. So our swimming program went away for a while. We didn't, and our really nationally recognized track and field teams had never had any real indoor place to practice. We had the old mile or half-mile track under the cinder track under the old gym. So Walter came forward, gave the major gift, and they did a really remarkable job. combining all of those old facilities into one place. Not only was it athletic facilities, but it was educational. David Burns gave money for the educational wing that has classrooms. And it's just, and it's been a lifesaver in other ways because the field house, just this year we had to have commencement inside, and it's a beautiful spot for that. Another somewhat admissions-related initiative in 2004, Fred Wackerly, one of our trustees, funded the purchase of private apartments that were located just east of the college and turning those into residential units for upper-class students so they could have a sense of independence. They have their own kitchens, they can cook, that sort of thing. So it became a really popular alternative to the residence hall, and that continues to this day being a popular locale. In 2005, President Giese moved on, and Maury Ditzler was our 13th president. Construction had already begun on a new residence hall on the north side of campus. At the time, it was just called North Hall because we didn't have a naming gift, but it was, again, it was in the mold of Bowers Hall, a co-ed residence, everything, very comfortable and allowing students to really enjoy the whole experience. 2006, the manor, which is now the Bondurant Alumni House, was given to the college by Bonnie Bondurant Shattuck, and it became, actually Dick Valentine had lived there and bought it when he was vice president and renovated it, but it was again renovated and used as a guest house. Very elegant place for visiting faculty or prospective faculty, guests, that sort of thing. And Austin Hall, which had become the music building, I believe it was in the late 50s. It was originally built as a dormitory in 1922. It got an exterior renovation. And David Fleming, who had passed away, well, he hadn't passed away yet, but he and Mary, his wife, donated funds to kind of beautify the area that had been sort of a driveway going up behind Wells Hall, build a nice sort of permanent park there, and then also we built the nice steps going down the hill so you didn't slide down in the winter so easily. Following year, Gracie Peterson Hall, the third in the triad of new residence facilities, and Bill Goldsboro, our wonderful, recently chairman of the board, gave the funding to name it for Gracie Peterson because he felt she had given so much of her life to the college, she needed to be permanently recognized. What's interesting about Gracie Peterson is she's the only person that has 3 places on campus named in her memory. One is the Peterson Plaza in front of Wells Theater, and then there is a room in the library, the Gracie Peterson room, where her collection of music, records, sheet music, and some of her memorabilia is stored. So quite fitting for a woman that lived to 103 and was part of the faculty for over 50 years. Again, in 2007, more parking. The old Monmouth Hospital, many of you remember, some of you probably went there, had been turned into a nursing home, and the company that owned it was going to close it down. It was empty, and so the college had a facility for physical plant on 14th Street, way north or way east of the college, and so basically they made a swap with that land. So the college took the land where the old hospital was and gave that property on 14th Street to the developers. Also that year, we purchased Weeks House, named in honor of Stafford and Winifred Weeks. And this is a great place on campus where we have our philosophy and religious studies department, but it's also got some nice spaces for discussions and It's just nice to have sort of that dedicated thing, especially named after Stafford, who was a chaplain and really a spiritual leader on campus for so many years. Okay, athletics to the forefront again in 2009, and Walter Huff again came to the rescue. And after his first wife, Elizabeth, had passed away, he got reacquainted with an old classmate, April Zorn. They got married. Sadly, April passed away as well, so he wanted to memorialize April, and she had a real interest in athletics at the college. So he funded a large part of a total rebuilding of our football stadium. Really state-of-the-art with field turf, grass, a video scoreboard, beautiful suites for the press and for visitors, and lights. And lights are an interesting thing. We don't typically play night football games, but it allows the facility to be used after hours. For example, our marching band is able to practice at night. Also intramurals, sometimes early in the morning before the sun comes up, it's usable. So it's really, and we've had some high school games there at night, which is always nice to get high school students on campus when you can and impress them. Okay, 2010, a couple of new things. Our educational garden was established through a grant, and it's really, some of you went and saw it. It's kind of a neat thing. A lot of colleges at the time were starting to have gardens. Sustainability was huge, and but it's also an educational thing. And part of the grant was we would interact with the community. We would show school kids how a garden works and invite people to visit. And then also we had what was called the Greek Life Initiative. And again, it was recognized that Greek life, if done properly, can be a great recruiting tool and a great retention tool, especially. And so the plan was, for years, of course, you know, our women's fraternities had no homes on campus. It was always said, oh, they don't really want them. It's like, I really doubt that was true. But the college decided we're going to build one new one, and maybe that will start sort of a momentum to get Greek life revitalized on campus. At the time, Alpha Xi Delta had gone away. It came back, but it was kind of overshadowed by the Monmouth duo, Pi Phi and Kappa. So it was decided to allow Alpha Xi to be the first tenants of that. And it kind of, in a way, backfired, because all of a sudden Alpha Xi became so strong because everybody wanted to be part of that beautiful facility. 2011, didn't do a whole lot, but the admission building, it had been used for, back in your day, it was sort of the administration building, most of you, or the fine arts. And they had the business office in an annex in the back that didn't look too good. And they had president's offices, they had dean's offices, they had, you know, all kinds of things in there competing for space. And it was decided, you know, let's have one focus place on campus for admissions for prospective students, beautiful old home, central location, and let's just make it that. And so they took off that old 1957 edition, did a nice job blending in the original architecture, and now it is a dedicated building for admissions and financial aid. 2012, the garden was doing really well, and we got land east of Monmouth from Judge Scott Klukas, who was a longtime Monmouth resident, well-known judge. He loved coming to Monmouth College to hang out with students in the cafeteria. He would be there daily to meet with them. And he has this small acreage just east of town, and when he passed away, the college received that, and it allowed us to really expand what we could offer. You know, we've got blueberries, raspberries, and then they're planting an orchard, and a lot of things like seasonal things that they couldn't do in just the smaller garden. And 2013 was the real banner year. That was the opening of the Center for Science and Business, 138,000 square feet. And that had its inception partly because of the business department. And some of you may know the business department had been housed in the old McMichael Science Building, and the business and accounting were two of our really strong programs. And they just really outgrown that space, and there was need for a new building. There was also a need for a new science building. That was really why President Ditzler had been hired, because he had experience building science buildings. They were worried. They thought they could get the funding, raised for a science building, but they weren't sure they could also get the funding for a business building. So they started to think about what could we do to fold the two together into one project. And the more they thought about it, it made sense, because an intersection of science and business is really what's going to drive the economy in the future. Scientists have to know how to market their products, their inventions, and businessmen have to understand the science behind it. And so the hope was, if we could build a facility where all these different disciplines come together, discuss things, and have the students get used to that, that will be a great innovation. And so some of the labs were made kind of multi-purpose, very useful for various disciplines, and it all kind of worked. And it was about a $42 million facility, but it gave us really a start for a future institution that's much bigger and stronger. Another new thing, as you know, downtown Monmouth has been suffering. We have a lot of empty buildings, and so the college did a partnership with some developers. The old Brownland Scott building, some of you may remember, it later became a female apparel store called Martha Brown Limited, but it had been sitting empty. The developers bought the building. The college put its labor into turning it into an experimental theater. And it's really an interesting place. It's got a nice lobby which can be used as a gallery. And the theater space is very versatile. It can be a black box. It can be theater in the round. It can be whatever they want. So every year we have at least one production there that is innovative and kind of interesting. 2016, the Greek initiative kind of continued. Harold Knapide, who was a former trustee, wanted to memorialize his mother, who was a Pi Phi at Monmouth, and he gave a really major gift. He'd been talking about it for years, to create a brand new Pi Beta Phi house, which is so appropriate in the campus where the first women's fraternity was founded. And it's just really, it speaks for itself. It's unbelievable. And, you know, that helped Pi Phi maybe gain back some of its recruiting that the Alpha Z's had maybe taken away. 2017, Dave Bowers stepped forward again. He really wanted to make his residence hall as comfortable as possible, and so he personally paid for constructing a parking lot. Parking along that west side of campus was pretty tight anyway. It was a rather major undertaking because of the EPA rules that require a separate storm sewer from the other sewer. And so in order to build a parking lot there, they had to put a new rain sewer that would go clear and connect with a larger one in the Huff Athletic Center. So that required a lot of engineering. In 2017, Kappa finally got its equalizer. This house became available. It had been owned by a vice president, Tim Kefauver from the class of '80, who was moving on, and it was available. Gracious house. Much of it had been renovated, and it really makes a nice, you know, it's a historic setting for such a historic women's fraternity. 2017, another makeover. Things, you know, time moves on. the makeover from the early 2000s was getting tired, so Scots Dining took over the main dining room, and that's what some of you ate there last night. Then 2011 was an interesting time. Our development staff was really growing. We had to do that to take care of the gifts that were coming in, and space on campus was limited. Earlier, our physical plant had moved to this facility, which had been a Kmart building at one time, and then it was Equipco, which remanufactured soft drink machines, but it was across the highway. But really the only space we had for this growing development office was unused space out here. So our physical plant did some remarkable work to transform that into beautiful offices. Still not ideal though, because they weren't on campus, and especially the alumni offices, which you really want your alumni on campus. So we were looking for a buyer. We finally found one, and a grocery store is going up there as we speak. So in order to get people back on campus, we had to do some creative thinking. We got Bonnie Shattuck to agree to turn what had been the guest house into an alumni house. And so now our alumni department is housed there, got some really nice renovations. Development was put into a building at 903 East Broadway. Most people don't know it, but it actually has a name, Sherrick Hall. It was purchased by the college in 1947 for women's housing, freshman women, and Chauncey Sherrick was a trustee at the time that helped bring that about, and they named it after him. But it's been used, the college has owned it over the years, but it's been used mainly for rented as apartment. And then physical plant needed a new space, so there was a former funeral home on North Main that was available, and so that was renovated, and our campus services is there as well as our physical plant. And there was a bus garage behind that has allowed us to use some of that space. Our most recent triumph was a renovation of Greer Hall, and some of you have seen it, some of you will see it. This was done through a new initiative we have called our Capital Improvement Fund, which allows us to actually have money available to use for whatever project we seem to think is going to be most impactful, rather than having to go out and raise funds for a new project. So this was a year-long renovation. The students graciously moved out during that time, and it was really, I mean, if you go through it, you'll be amazed at how beautiful the transformation was. And so, just to wrap up, the idea of a walking campus, this is a map of the campus in the 1960s, and as you can see, some of you remember you used to be able to drive through campus behind the gymnasium and through the student center, and there was parking in front of the student center, and you could drive out between Greer and McMichael Hall. And then, of course, 7th Street went all the way through. We had the gym here, and we had Gibson Hall on the corner, and Fulton and ATO up there in Graham Hall. So these were all the yellow was taken out, and Detroit. So you can see that made finally a cohesive footprint for the campus. And President Ditzler had come from Wabash College, and it had a beautiful quad in the middle of campus with trees and that sort of thing. Originally, they were talking about building some townhouses for fraternities in here. But when he saw this new space that had been created, he said, well, let's rethink that. Let's try to keep that a park-like setting. And I think, in years to come, that will be a wise choice. So, this was the Monmouth College campus of just under 20 years ago. Michael Hall here, Marshall Hall, Gibson Hall, and it kind of ended here. And so, to give you a perspective, this is the Monmouth College campus of today. Quite a remarkable transformation. And that's all. So I hope you enjoyed it and learned a few things. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer. Tom?
I noticed that there's also an international house.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about the origins of that?
Yeah, the Theta Chi house, former Theta Chi house, Theta Chi's they wore out their welcome, I guess you could say. It was used for some different things. We actually had some monks living there for a time in the 80s, which was really kind of strange. And then it was used when our English department was transitioning to Mellinger Center. They were located there for a while, and we had a guest house in there, some various things. And then finally, we really a new emphasis on intercultural life and having a place where international students could congregate and kind of feel at home. And so that was available. And so it's in a nice central location right across from the Center for Science and Business. They have a room where they have a couple of rooms where they can gather and have activities. And so a lot of our minority students also like to hang out there. And it's just, it's serving a new purpose rather than just being another building that is used for whatever. So, yes.
Could I add to that, please? I'm Marilyn Hubbard.
Yes.
And Bill's family had the Hubbard House, which his great-grandfather had built. And when his father had passed away in 1988, we gifted that house to the college as a center for cultural diversity.
Yes.
Intended for that. And the college used it for about 15 years or so, and then college students in an 1860s house, the college required either a lot of money to restore that house, or they needed to raise it. So there is a plaque on the corner there, and the Hubbards had, for a couple generations, had college students living in that house, and we counted at least 70 college students, Rod Lemon being one of the latter ones. Yeah. But anyway, that was really the start of the Center for Cultural Diversity.
Yes, thank you for reminding me.
Into
right.
The intercultural.
And thanks to Bill for being so gracious to allow that to happen.
So make a comment. You're talking about the glaciers.
Mm-hmm.
They actually didn't push soils down.
Okay.
The glaciers were here about 10,000 years ago, 2 miles thick of ice,
Okay.
and they bring all this crap down with them, and then they leave. They left here about 10,000 years ago, and between 10,000 years and now, the soils formed that you're on now, and that's why the soils in northern Illinois are different from southern. Now you're asking, how do I know that? Because I was a geology major.
Thank you for that. Yeah, the geology program unfortunately fell victim to the sort of recession in the early 90s. And so that was the least, we were turning out the least number of majors, and that just seemed to be the one that had to be cut. And a lot of colleges unfortunately have done that with geology. Don't know if there will be a future for it, but it would be nice. Yes.
We can talk about that.
Any other questions? Okay, are we needing to move on?
Yes. Yeah. Join me again in thanking Jeff for such a comprehensive.
And we will be doing tours.